وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين، لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان، روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف، ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This evening I want to continue in the Q&A sessions that we've been having, that we had in the past. I don't think it was in the email, and actually I had a backlog of questions that had come in the previous months. So I'm going to try to answer a few of those questions this evening, and if time permitting, if anybody from the floor has anything, then we can entertain those questions at that time. So one point I did want to mention actually is just very briefly touch upon the event of the Mi'raj that was historically we're told that, so let me just mention briefly that historically we're told that when it comes to the Isra and the Mi'raj, that this is obviously one of the events that happened in the life of the Prophet. We know for a fact, because Allah talks about this in the Quran in at least 2 instances. The very first mention of it in the Quran is chapter number 17, which is actually called Surah Isra, or also known as Surah Bani Israel, in which Allah basically glorifies Himself. Allah praises Himself and says that glory be to He, meaning Allah, who carried His servant on a night journey from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa. And then Allah gives us just one brief statement where He says, or He explains why He gave Rasulullah this travel, this journey, and He says, لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا, so that we might show Him of our magnificent signs. So this is an event we're told happened on the 27th of Rajab. According to the majority of scholars, it was 10 years after the prophetic mission began. So just shortly before the migration to Medina. Scholars are also, they differ on the fact of how many times the Prophet went on these journeys. There is no doubt that at least that very first one, which was again in that 10th year when the Islam began, was the most, we can say, important one, and the one where he was taken not only by the spirit but by the body as well. And so that's important to keep in mind, that it was not just a spiritual journey, because there are some opinions amongst the Muslim world where they say that the journey of the Prophet was spiritual. But obviously and we actually have direct hadith from the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, where they basically reprimand people who have that opinion, because to journey in your sleep is not a big deal. I mean, we ourselves, when we go to bed, we journey around the world. Maybe when we dream, we go to far off places as well. But the goal of the Mi'raj was a physical journey of the Prophet, and it began actually in the house of Imam Ali, Hani. So as we know, Imam Ali had a few sisters, and so Rasulullah began this journey in the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which is obviously in the precincts of the Kaaba in Mecca. And it was a 2-stage journey. So the term that we usually hear is Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. Isra is the land portion of the journey. So it was a travel on land from Mecca to what is now known as Masjid al-Aqsa, that mosque that you see in Jerusalem today with a gold dome. Obviously that wasn't there at the time of the Prophet, but that land has always been a sacred land in Islam. Obviously we know that many prophets are related to that geographic region. We know that when Nabi Isa alayhi salam, when Prophet Jesus makes his return, he will actually, the hadith tell us that he will descend on a ladder of light into what is now known as a Masjid al-Aqsa. That compound area is where Nabi Isa will arrive. So the Prophet made that physical journey, first of all, from Masjid al-Haram to that region. He experienced what he did, and some of the hadith books that we have and some of the narratives speak about what happened to the Prophet in that locality. And then from there comes the Mi'raj. So Mi'raj is interesting because this word isn't not even used in the Quran in this context. There is a surah in the Quran called Ma'arij, the ascensions or the ways of ascension. But the actual word Mi'raj is not used in the Quran by Allah to speak about this event. That's where we look at the hadith and we find that this event is spoken about with this particular term. And so this becomes the second portion of the journey of Rasulullah, where he goes from Masjid al-Aqsa into the heavens. Now obviously this was again a physical and it was a physical journey of the Prophet. Many of the facts that we read in the hadith, they tell us, for example, that he was on a winged animal called Burak. Some of them give descriptions of what this animal was like. But ultimately, obviously, we realize that, and this is something that our scholars are very quick to point out, is that the journey itself of the Prophet is a unique experience. Right? Because when we look in the Quran, if you look in Surah An-Najm, where Allah talks about the journey that the Prophet made, He talks about, Allah says, for example, فَقَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, that he was like 2 bow lengths closer or even closer to Allah. But we all know that Allah is not a physical body, right? He doesn't have a specific spatial residence, and He's not limited to time or space. So, how do we reconcile the fact that Allah is not physical with the fact that now Rasulullah is taken on a physical journey to quote unquote meet Allah? And so this is where our scholars tell us that obviously Allah is not limited to time or space. The reason that the journey took place was for Allah to show, as He says in Surah number 17, the miraculous creations of Allah, and that we have to understand the entire journey in that light, that it was a experience for the Prophet to really witness and realize the majesty of Allah. And then obviously we have hadith, for example, there's a lengthy hadith of Mi'raj, which unfortunately is not available in English, but the text spans about 40 or 50 pages, and it actually recounts what the Prophet was seeing at every stage of the journey rather. So there are descriptions, for example, of heaven and of people being, given the pleasures of Jannah. And there are very vivid pictures and descriptions of what was happening to the people in the hellfire, right? The punishments that people were getting. And the Prophet was asking Jibreel, for example, on the journey, well, this person being punished, what are they being punished for? And he was given punishments and or the sins in the world and the punishments that were related to them. One of the things that sometimes people ask is, well, heaven and hell are not yet full, right? Because we're still living the world. There's no day of judgment yet. And so the scholars, when they look at this hadith, they say that this experience of the Prophet, seeing heaven or hell or seeing, pleasure and punishment, was not of the world to come, but it was what they call the barzakh, right? The barzakh being an intermediary realm for us. When we die, we go into our grave. That is when our early day of judgment begins, where there is, as the hadith tell us, that your grave can either be a garden from amongst the gardens of paradise, or the hadith says it can be a pit of fire from amongst the fires of hell. So this is, according to our scholars, what the Prophet was witnessing was the punishment or the rewards even of that intermediary realm. And then obviously he ends up coming back to Mecca, and many of the people who obviously had doubted him continue to doubt him, right? Because you imagine that 10 years he's proclaiming a mission of him being a messenger of God, and now he comes and tells people that I've just traveled to the heavens, right? Or I've traveled from here to Jerusalem, which would take, days or weeks by a caravan. And now he's telling people in the blink of an eye, he did this entire journey. Obviously, those who wanted to not accept him, use this as more fodder to reject his mission. And those who obviously were convinced of Rasulullah, they became even more convinced. And just to end this story here, one of the things that ends up happening is when the Prophet comes back from the heavens to Jerusalem, back to Mecca, he actually told the Quraysh, the disbelievers of the Quraysh, of a caravan that was approaching, that had left Jerusalem, it was coming towards Mecca, and that it would reach in a certain number of days. And he gave them all the specifics of this caravan. And obviously they rejected him. They said, well, this is, he's just making things up. And eventually, as the historians mentioned, this caravan approached and entered to Mecca. And all of the specifics that the Prophet talked about of that caravan, the number of camels, the people, whatever they were carrying, everything obviously turned out to be accurate. But as we know, as we've seen throughout history, that even when messengers come and they foretell the future events and they explain things with clarity, people still find a way to reject that message. And this is nothing new. It's happened since the time of the earliest prophets, and it continues to happen. Then when messengers come with a message, when they come to teach something which is from Allah, many times people reject that message and obviously deny that message from God. So in a nutshell, this is the Mi'raj. And again, it happened at least once to the Prophet on the 27th of Rajab, 10 years after the official invitation. And scholars do mention that it may have happened multiple times afterwards, but this was the one which is spoken about in the Quran in these two particular passages. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Few of the questions that came up, so I'm just going to go through them. There's three particular questions that were mailed in, and so I just wanted to go over them because they really, I think they pertain to all of us probably in this room. One of them was that, is it permissible to purchase life insurance? Very valid question, because there are a majority of Muslims in the world today who say that to purchase life insurance is haram, and they say, well, you're trying to cheat death by purchasing life insurance. It's a very strange connection how they get, cheating death and purchasing life insurance, because we all know that if we're going to die, we're going to die, whether we have life insurance or not. It's not a matter that you buy insurance and now God will somehow miraculously protect you with a bubble that you're not going to die. So when our scholars and all of our maraji are unanimous on this issue, is that yes, it is permissible to purchase life insurance. There's no religious prohibition from it. And also it is a valid expense, meaning that in Islam we have valid expenses and we have invalid expenses. An invalid expense is something where it is forbidden to spend money on something. And if you were to spend money on that, you still are liable for the khums on it. So as an example, let's just say somebody purchases a haram commodity like alcohol, and they spend, let's say, $10,000 in a year. If they were really following the religion, first of all, they wouldn't be buying alcohol. But if they were, that is an illegitimate expense. So although that money is no longer with them, they are still liable for the khums of that money, had they had that savings. Life insurance is not one of those. So our marajas say that that is a valid expense. You've spent, let's say, $50, $60, $100, $200 a month, whatever your premiums are for your life insurance policy. That is a valid expense that you can claim off your record. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So it is a valid expense that you can make, and it is deductible. So you don't have to pay any khums on that premium that you pay. Some people also wonder, well, is there, should we buy it? Because, is there any need to provide safety or security for our family in the case of, especially men, if the men are the bread earners in the home? Is there any need for that? And I'll just give you one example of a story at the time of the Prophet. Obviously, they didn't have life insurance then, but the story nonetheless fits with this discussion of life insurance and providing for the family. So the story mentions that at the time of the Prophet, there was obviously one of the companions in Medina who was extremely wealthy. Very rich companion. He had a wife and children, and he passes away. He passes away, and because of his connection to Rasulullah, the Prophet himself took part in the burial, right? And putting him in the grave and doing all the prayers and this and that, and buries the body, and they go on with life. A few weeks or a few months later, the Prophet, walking through Medina, sees the children of this man who had passed away. And they've got ripped clothing on, their face is dirty, they're looking in a very bad state. And he's shocked because he knew that the father of these children was an extremely wealthy man. So knowing that the Prophet knew this man's status in terms of financial, that he was, a very comfortable person financially, he goes to the widow, to the wife, to the mother of these children, and he talks to the mother and says, I knew your husband to be very rich. What happened? Why are you living in this state? Your children are completely, they're not kept well. And she basically goes on to tell the Prophet that, yes, my husband was very rich, but before he died, or in his will, he gave everything that he had to charity. He didn't keep a penny for us. He didn't care for us. He just gave everything away, thinking that this would be his way to, get to Jannah, get to paradise. The hadith actually mentions, and very rarely did the Prophet ever get upset, right? He was a very cool and collected man. But when somebody would transgress the laws of God, he would actually, you would see the visible anger on his face. And they say that this is one of those times he got upset. And he actually told this woman, the widow, that had I known that he was going to do this, I would not have done the Salatul Janazah, the Namaz Mayat over this individual and taken care of, putting his body in the grave. Because he didn't care for his family. Right? So it shows us that Islam has that emphasis that yes, you have to care for the family. And obviously in our day and age, it's very hard for many people to have large savings. Right? I mean, we don't know who's going to die first, obviously. But we always think, well, let us keep something for our spouse, for our wife, for our children as a way for them to be comfortable. We don't know who will die, when, where. Many of us don't have, for example, the luxury of a large, a job that pays, a large amount that you can save. So life insurance becomes the next best alternative. So it is permissible. One point to keep in mind is that the benefit of that life insurance, so if a person passes away, if the husband dies, the beneficiary, it doesn't go into the estate of the will, right? So a person has an insurance policy, let's say $500,000. The amount will not be transferred into the estate to be divided amongst inheritors. So this would go directly to the individual who is named as the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. Any questions on that before I go to the second question? So it is permissible, there's no khums on it, and it goes not to your inheritors, but whoever you write in the insurance policy, that it goes to them. Yeah. A second question came up, what about car and home insurance? Are these allowed? And obviously we know that we live in a society where I think most jurisdictions actually mandate, it's legislated to have these insurance policies. Whether it's at the level of how much your property is worth, that's another issue. But again, from the religious point of view, from the fiqh of the Ahlul Bayt, there is no problem. Home insurance, very well valid, obviously. Car insurance, it's a necessity, I think, to even buy a car. You have to have an insurance policy. At least in Ontario, you have to have an insurance policy before you can actually even take possession of the car. But again, religiously, we have no problem with it. Our scholars have given clear rulings that even car and home insurance are no problem. Did you have a question? Sorry. No, okay, sorry. And the third question that came again about personal life is, what about purchasing a home via a mortgage? Right? Again, we know we live in a society today where it is impossible, probably for most people, to go and pay cash and buy a house. Traditionally, obviously, as we know, and the Quran clearly mentions that interest itself, what the Quran calls riba, is haram. Right? So there's no doubt about that. Paying interest is haram in Islam, or what the Quran will call riba. I don't want to really call it interest because there could be a different definition of what the Quran refers to as riba. But generally speaking, that is forbidden to pay for a Muslim. It's haram for us to pay, or it is also haram for us to give. So, that becomes a challenge on many fronts, because if you think about it, you go in, you get a mortgage or you get a bank loan to buy a car, to, fund your home renovations, whatever the case may be. You're always paying more to the bank than what you've borrowed, right? You're paying whatever the prime rate plus or whatever the interest rate is, you're always paying more. Islam came in basically, and when you look in the sins in the Quran, very few times does Allah become very stern with penalties. But when it talks about riba, Allah actually says that if you don't desist in this act of usury, of excessive usury, Allah says, get ready that you are about to fight a war against Allah and the Messenger of Allah. Right? And we know that if you're going to fight a war with Allah, he's definitely going to win. I mean, he's got the entire arsenal at his disposal, right? So this sin of riba is so severely condemned in Islam, and even in previous scriptures, that Allah calls it as if you have fought a war against Allah and His Messenger. And so we have to realize that generally speaking, interest is prohibited. An interest-bearing loan is prohibited. Even if you lend a friend $50, right, and they say, "I'll pay you back on Friday when we get paid," you can't take $51 back. You have to only take what was given to you. And even scholars go into the discussion about taking commodity. You give somebody, I don't know, a pound of sugar, and you take back 2 pounds. All of those forms of lending of anything, money or anything else, are prohibited. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. I don't want to go into them today. But seeing the predicament that we were in the West, obviously, it's not possible for anybody probably to buy a house, or very few to buy with cash. Our Maraja, and this is going back to probably the time of the late Ayatollah Al-Khoui, and maybe even before him, they were given the scenario of the situation here in the West, the way the banking system works. And obviously, they do their own ijtihad, their research based on the ayat of the Quran, of the hadith. And they said that yes, riba is still prohibited, but they have found what we can call maybe legal loopholes within the Sharia, within the Islamic teachings. And I've talked about these before, legal loopholes which are present to permit us to use this system in terms when we need to use it. Now, they're very careful to mention that loans that are interest-bearing, we still have to be careful. Because yes, if it's a house, and if it's a house that I have to buy, right? Because we can't, as a community, we can't just afford to always be renting, right? It's not practical, it's not rational to spend $1,500, $2,000 a month to rent when your mortgage payments would be maybe significantly less than that rental amount. But we have to be careful that it is within the means and our own ability. So, for example, if a person can only afford to finance, let's just say, a $500,000 home, but they see, well, my brother, my sister, my friends are buying larger homes, and they're going deeper in debt, then there is a problem there with that extra loan that you're taking. If it's more than your need, if it's more than what you need for life, then there's a problem. That's where the religion will now come down and say that this is a prohibition. Or for example, people, because somebody in the community has a nice fancy car, that now you want to buy a similar car or one higher up. You don't need it. It's a want. It's a greed. These examples are where the scholars will say, well, that is crossing the level of where it is permissible to take a loan and pay interest and where it is impermissible. So literally speaking, the general gist of it is that if it is a need of your life, right, you need that home, you need that vehicle, you need, medical treatment, you need clothing for your family, food, these necessities of life, that's not a problem. If you need to take a loan and pay interest, it's within your means that these are things that you need for survival, then that's not a problem. To go over and above that, I want to remodel the home and buy all new appliances, not because we need it, but just because it looks nice. It's not for a specific need that we have. Or sometimes people say, well, I've never been for Umrah, or I've never gone for ziyarat, so I'm going to take out a loan to go for ziyarat. This again is not allowed. Right? Yes, it's nice to go for Umrah, it's good to go for Hajj, it's nice to go for ziyarah, but not at the expense of paying interest into the system. So purchasing a home, yes, is not a problem as long as it is within the means of the individual. It is at their status, their level, there is not a problem. You can take out a mortgage, and obviously those payments are we can say khums deductible. There's no sin on you. You're not having to pay khums on that. And I will mention, just as I end this last one, that some of our current maraja do actually allow a person to save for a home and not pay khums on that amount of savings. So at least two different maraja, including Ayatollah Sistani, they have a ruling where in normal circumstances, if we're saving for something, we have to pay khums on that money. So you have a savings account. In 99% of the instances, that savings is khums liable. Except if you're saving for your son's wedding or your daughter's wedding, that money, you don't have to pay khums on it. So if people are, know that their son or daughter will get married in 5 or 10 years and they need whatever amount for the wedding, that money that you save with that intention is not khums liable for the boy and for the girl. But some of the maraja do now mention that if you are a first-time home buyer and you don't have the means to put a significant down payment on the home, and you're saving for that home, and again, it's within your means, you're not going extravagant, then that amount that you're saving also is khums free. Right? So that amount that you're putting towards your first time home, not that you're now an investor, you're buying and selling and flipping homes and this, no. You're a first time home buyer, you can't enter the market unless you have a good down payment. Husband and wife, let's say, are working, you're saving. That money that is intended for the house, as long as, again, that house is within your status, within your means, that money that you've saved is khums free. There is no khums to pay on that. Obviously, everything after that is khums liable. That basically does it for the few questions that we have. We have about 15 minutes till Maghrib. If there's any questions, we'll have about 5 minutes to take them. Yes? So the question was that what other forms of savings do not require khums? Basically all savings other than if you're preparing for your son or daughter's wedding, those savings, all other savings would have khums attributed to those. So for example, somebody's saving up for education, university, there's khums on that. Pretty much every other type of savings that we have. Yes, correct. So when it comes to savings, and that's for our children who are not baligh, there is a difference of opinion amongst our scholars. So people like the late Ayatollah Khoui, I believe Ayatollah Khomeini as well, they said because the children weren't baligh yet, there would be no khums on them. So once they become of age and they take over that account, then if there's any remainder, they would pay khums. Ayatollah Sistani differs on that opinion, and he says that even though the children aren't baligh and the account is in their name, or the RESP, let's say, is in their name, but the guardian of the children is still responsible for the khums that is being put aside for them. There is that difference of opinion amongst the scholars on that issue. Yes.
And you come to a smaller community where the house is cheap and you pay off the house and you still have a balance remaining. Do you pay khums on the balance that you have remaining, which was part of the equity of your primary house?
If you're going to have that for more than 1 year, then yes, you would be paying khums on that equity, that savings that you have. Yes. So yeah, you would be paying the khums on that if you have it for more than 1 year. Yeah. Yes.
Question about future value. Does collecting interest, because the money that I have right now is worth less 5 years down the road. Are you allowed to collect money to account for the future value of your
Basically, the way the religion looks at it is that anything which is over and excess of your legitimate needs for the year is taxable. So in your example, yes, and any savings you have, even though the value of the currency is obviously not going to be worth as much in the future as it is now, if you're saving it for the here and now, as you're saving it right now, there is khums still liable on that.
So as an example, inflation is 4% per year.
Yes.
My dollar today is worth 96 cents.
No, you're not. No. So yeah, the religion that wouldn't, just for the benefit of the sisters as well, that in terms of like the example you give with inflation, 4%, your dollar is not worth $1. At the end of the day, whatever savings that we have is still khums liable, regardless of the inflation. Because again, keep in mind that khums is on our net savings at the end of the day, right? On the interest. So yes, even on the interest there would be khums. Now the challenge with interest though, keep in mind, is that with certain, let's say like you have RRSPs or you have, investments. So obviously we don't have access to that money. I mean, we might log into our bank, we'll see how much our investments are worth, the book value, the market value. There would not be khums payable on those investments until you actually cash them out, right? And so once they cash out is when you begin to start paying the khums if you have any savings on that money. So one of the things to keep in mind is, let's just say for a round park number, let's say you have a $100,000 investment, and you've paid khums on that money. Before you put it in, you paid khums on it. Let's just say when you retire, it's worth $120,000, just as an example. The smart thing to do would be that when you begin to draw from that money, draw from the $20,000 of the return. Don't draw from the principal. So it's based on your intention. So draw on the return, and then if that's not with you for the entire year, then obviously there's no khums because you've already covered the principal that you've put in. So that's a key thing to keep in mind, even for our day-to-day savings, is that keep your intention. No, obviously, I mean, that means that we need to almost be accountants to keep in track of our money and what we're paying of khums and how much is, khums free and what is the remainder. But it's important to keep in mind those, and sort of when you pull that money out, ensure that you pull with the correct intention, that you're not touching your principal, you're touching the interest. And in which case, if you use it all up within, that 1 year, then there would obviously be nothing liable for khums on you. Yes?
So you said you could save money for the, let's say, first time home buyer. There's no home side.
Yes.
End of the day, you moved, if you work a property, you still have rental money
Mm-hmm.
from what you had saved. Is there now qualified for homes? Let's say I put aside $100,000 and I ended up spending $80,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you should. So whatever you put away for that expense should be used for that particular issue. So just like a marriage, if you put aside 10,000, you only spend 8, right? That 2,000 is still considered a saving. So I mean, you could get away with not paying khums. Let's say if you give it as a gift to your child, right? For them as a wedding gift, then that's up to them to take care of the khums, and if they don't use it within the year, but yeah. And I think you have a question. Mm-hmm.
So, like, I have, so, do I still have to pay homes because I have enough money?
If your guardians, your mother, father, are following a marja taqlid, let's say like Ayatollah Sistani, who says that children who are not of age, baligh yet, have to pay khums, then yes, you would have to, they would have to take it out of your account and pay that khums on your behalf, basically. Yeah. And last one, yes. Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Yes. Yes.
Now, anything that's accrued beyond that, so for instance, you get a return of say 10%.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's $100,000 and the 10% was actually $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, sorry.
10,000. 10,000.
So that $10,000 that you're drawing out, so say when you retire and you draw out money, you would take out 20% of the amount that you're drawing out, or would it be 20% of whatever you drew out and kept for 1 year?
Yeah, so it's just for the ladies to benefit as well. So if you have a $100,000 investment, you get a 10% accrual, so $10,000 return. You begin to draw from that. If you draw with the intention of taking that 10%, that accrual that you've gotten, that 10,000, if you have anything remaining from that $10,000, then you would pay khums on it. So if you take it out, let's say in the middle of the year, let's say just June 1st, you take it out. And let's just say, I don't know, March is your khums date, right? March 1st. You take it out in June. Until the next year, till March, till your khums day, from that 10,000, you have nothing of it left, then there would be no khums liable. If you have $1,000 left, then obviously you'd pay 20%, $200 on that money that you had drawn out. But your principal, because your principal, you've already paid khums on it, let's say, and that's a habit that many people do, is when they make let's say they put in 20,000 in RSP, some people will take out that 4,000, and so that at least that 20,000 is now clear. That way, when they do begin to draw from their retirement, let's say, they know that all of their RSP contributions are completely khums free. then they're only having to be concerned about what they're drawing out of that. So if you, again, you have to keep all those records clear, so you know how much you had contributed, you know at the end of the day how much is coming back to you, and then you'd be paying khums on the remainder if you have it for that 1 year. Yeah. We'll end there, inshallah, because the prayer time coming up, and hopefully we'll continue this next month. I'll give the community forewarning of when the date is, so that way if you have any questions, those can be emailed in, and so we can answer those to the best of our ability. Next session, which will probably be at the end of Sha'ban, just before Ramadan. And obviously, as we know, the moon sighting was there. Well, there was no moon sighting, but by default we'll complete 30 days. So today is the last day of the month of Rajab. Tomorrow is the first day of Sha'ban. And obviously that means that Ramadan is 30 days away, probably. So we ask Allah to accept our acts of worship that we have performed in this month of Rajab. We ask Allah that if we fasted, that we are counted amongst the Rajabiyun. We ask Allah to forgive us any of our sins. We ask Allah to keep each and every one of us and our spouses and our children on the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we ask Allah for the alleviation of all the suffering of all of those people around the world who are suffering in many parts of the world. And we ask Allah to bring a downfall to those who are causing the oppression, and that Allah lifts those who are being oppressed to the level where they can, regain their dignity and their self-worth. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Let us recite one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.